scripture reading will be from Ephesians 5:23 through 32. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy, without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.
Morning. Thank you, Bennett. Is there anyone, there we go. Is there anyone who remembers, anybody wants to raise your hand and admit to remembering doing bomb drills, atomic bomb drills in elementary school? Remember the old jingle, duck and cover? Does that ring any bells in anyone's minds? Is there anyone who wants to admit to having a flat top haircut and horn-rimmed glasses and being the one conducting the drills? Anybody know? Bob Clark's not here, so I can't make fun of him. Denver, were you already in Alaska by that time? I think so. I don't remember the timing there. So, for those of you who experienced that, the going through it together, that becomes something that you guys know together that, you know, Bennett and I know nothing about. We don't know what that was like. But what about, who remembers the gasoline rationing of the 70s? Anybody? We got a few more there. You know, Bennett, does your license plate end in an even or an odd number? Exactly. You never pay attention to whether your license plate ends in an even or an odd number. But if you lived in the 70s during the gasoline rationing, you would know, because you would only be able to get gas on certain days, depending on if your license plate ended with an even number or an odd number. And nobody really has locking gas caps anymore. Who had a locking gas cap during that time? You didn't want anybody siphoning your gas out of there. So that's something that was a collective experience. And who has stories about the blizzard of '78? Ralph's told me some stories he's got some good stories about the blizzard of '78. In Arkansas, we didn't have any blizzards. No blizzard stories growing up in Arkansas. But one thing for me, for my generation, was the experience of 9/11. And not just the event itself that day, but I had a teacher in high school. I was just beginning my junior year of high school when that happened. And we had a teacher who had us all convinced that they were about to reinstate the draft and we were all going to get drafted. And, there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of things going on during that time. So we have these cultural touchstones of each generation, these things that we experience together. And like it or not, COVID-19 is going to be one of those. You're going to be telling your kids and grandkids about how we all came and sat 6 feet apart and had to wear masks, and all this craziness that we've been going through. And regardless of how you feel about the term the new normal, it's undeniable that our collective experience of this pandemic will affect the thought processes of an entire generation. There are times that indelibly alter our experience of life from that point forward. Sometimes it's a specific moment, like 9/11. Sometimes it's over a period of time. Sorry, I'm trying not to touch the podium. I always do that, and I've already got my stuff on. I remember sorry, this is totally off the subject, but One time I was about 10 or 11 years old. I was out in the deer woods with my uncle, and being 10 or 11 years old, any tree branch I could reach, I would grab. We weren't actually hunting that day. We were getting things ready to hunt a little while sooner. I was grabbing tree branches and touching this and touching that, and he said, if you don't have to, don't touch it. And because he was more concerned about leaving our scent behind. But that has come back in my mind so much more now. If you don't have to, don't touch it. If you can kick that door open, kick that door open. Don't touch anything you don't have to. Sorry, that's beside the point. Let me get back to what I was saying. Okay, whether we like it or not, life is different now than it was 6 months ago. There are factors that we take into account in our decision-making process that we didn't even think about 6 months ago. Now, hopefully, as we emerge on the other side of this, we can hold on to the good and we can move on from the negative. I think for so many people, we've slowed down the pace of life. Without all the extracurricular activities and everything else going on, we've realized, we can sit on the porch and just drink sweet tea. We can go for a walk with family. Did you guys realize bicycles are selling like hotcakes? Go somewhere and try to buy a bicycle right now. People are going on family bike rides. That's great. That's awesome. I hope that's something that we can hold on to. Stan Campley tells me that kayaks are selling like hotcakes too. So, I mean, all these outdoor activities, getting out and doing things, I hope that that's something that we can hold on to. I hope that next spring you don't see all these bicycles in yard sales saying, only been ridden once. I hope that we collectively, as a society, we continue these good habits that we've picked up during this time. And I hope, most importantly, that this time with family carries over. That our time together as a family, focusing on the things that are important, is what we take away from this time. So our Bible classes, we're still trying to continue, if you don't have children in these ages, we're still trying to continue our normal Bible class material for children in 3rd grade and down. And so I think I've been to everyone's house who has children in that age range and passed out booklets and all that good stuff. But if you haven't, then hey, let me know and I'll make sure to make that right. But our Bible classes lately have been focusing on Deuteronomy, specifically Deuteronomy chapter 6. And if you'll notice in the bulletin this week, whether you picked up a copy or received it in an email, that's another thing, if you're not receiving the bulletin by email, hey, we can get that to you. On the 3rd page of the bulletin, I put what I have been sending out to parents periodically, but I went ahead and put it in the bulletin this week because there's something else that goes along with that, with the book club that I want everybody to know about, but I'll come back and talk more about that later. But that 3rd page of the bulletin talks more about kind of what we're doing with Bible classes right now in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And this that it talks about in Deuteronomy chapter 6, this talking about the Word of God, when you lie down, when you rise up, when you walk by the way, all this encompassing every aspect of life. This is an entirely different approach to life than the rest of the world. And I think sometimes it's lost on us just how drastically different our very approach to life ought to be. But think back on your own life. Think back about some of the times when your life has drastically changed. When there's been something that happens that just changes your total outlook on life. And specifically thinking about fathers today, would you say that getting married and having children constituted a fundamental change in the way you approach life? What about becoming a Christian? I'm afraid to say that I think a lot of times the change in our lives is not all that dramatic. We were pretty much a good, upright, moral person before, and then we get baptized and we're still pretty much a good, upright, moral person. Is there a fundamental, dramatic shift that takes place that totally affects our decision-making process? If I had to boil this down to one thesis statement, as we're looking at Ephesians chapter 5, and we'll get into that a little more, I would say that it's detrimental to individual families, and it's harmful to society as a whole when men don't see their lives changing all that much when they get married and have children. We still want to participate in all the same hobbies. We still want to hold to all the same priorities. We expect to have interaction with our family on our own terms. And that's dangerous. But for everyone, I think if we're honest, we can say that a lot of times our relationship with God is similar. We put on our church clothes when we put on our church clothes, and we have our own time when we have our own time. I remember one time I was at a church camp. This was not Fort Hill, okay? I won't tell you where it was, but it was not Fort Hill. I overheard two young counselors, one of which was a second-year counselor. So he was probably about 20 years old. And another boy who was a first-year counselor. And so this second-year counselor was giving advice to this first-year counselor. And as I was just walking by and kind of overheard their conversation, he said, being a counselor is awesome. You get to do all the same fun things that you did as a camper, but you don't have to follow all the rules. Basically, you just get to do what you feel like doing. It's like, oh man, talk about missing the point. But I think a lot of times we approach fatherhood like that. I think a lot of times we approach adulthood, being a husband, being a wife. We still want to do all the same things we've always done. And we just want to tack these other things on the end of it. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Gave himself up for her. What does that look like? I think if you ask almost any husband in the world would say, yes, I would take a bullet for my wife in a heartbeat. I would do it. We would be willing in the theoretical situation to give ourselves up for our families in that way. Would we turn off the ball game? Would we cancel a fishing or a hunting trip? Would we come home early from a night out with the guys? We would never willingly let her take a bullet, but we're all too willing to let her die by 1,000 tiny pinpricks over time. This giving ourselves up for our families is more than just a one-time theoretical big deal kind of thing. It's an everyday life in the little things that shape and mold us into the kind of person we're becoming. This harkens back to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, verse 25, where he says, he who would save his life will lose it, and he who would lose his life for my sake and the gospel will find it. The idea of saving your life there, what does it mean to save your life? Well, just as in English, the word here has kind of multiple nuances of meanings. Save does not just mean like to rescue from a perilous situation. Yes, it sometimes means that, but it doesn't mean like, snatching somebody, out from in front of a train and saving their life in a big dramatic way. Save sometimes means to preserve or to keep intact or to save it for later. Do we want to keep our lives pretty much the same? Do we want to keep going and not let things affect us? I want to go on in this passage in Ephesians chapter 5. And I didn't ask Bennett to keep reading on down here, but I want to look down in chapter 6, verse 4. It says, Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So why here does it single out fathers? Why fathers? Why not mothers? And the Greek, the original language here is specific. It's not just saying parents, it's saying fathers. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up. Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So why fathers? This is difficult. Because I think as parents, and I'm learning this more and more, I know you got some of you may be thinking right now, oh, it's easy for him to say. His oldest kid is 7. He's never had a teenager yet. He doesn't know. And I realize that, and I acknowledge that up front. You know, this is kind of easy for me to stand up here and say. It's a difficult tension that we live in. This idea of when to speak up and when not. This pick your battles with your children. You know, what's something that's worth addressing and what's something that they're going to grow out of? Oh, that's a tough call. I want to look back in 1 Samuel chapter 2 real quickly and look at a couple passages here. 1 Samuel chapter 2, Eli is the priest at that time, and Eli has 2 sons that, depending on which version you're reading, worthless fellows. They just didn't turn out. They didn't turn out like their dad. The apple fell far from the tree. So Eli's sons here, let me read verse 12. Chapter 2, verse 12. It says, "Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord." Even though Eli himself was the priest, his sons didn't even know the Lord. On down in chapter 2, verse 29, it says, "Why then," this is a man of God speaking to Eli, and he says, "Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest part of every offering of my people Israel?" I want to focus in on this phrase, honor your sons above me. Honor your sons above me. Jesus says, "Whoever would love mother or father or family more than me is not fit for the kingdom." Do we do this? Is this possible to love our children more than we love God? I think a lot of times out of a misguided sense, a misguided feeling of affection, we feel like we love our kids. We have that feeling in our heart and we want to do what's loving, but that's not always loving. That's not always what's in their best interest. As parents, we have to be willing to have the difficult conversations. Look on down in chapter 3, verse 13 here, of 1 Samuel. See what it says. It says, "And I declared to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them." He knew what his sons were doing, and he did not restrain them. There's a similar indictment against David a little ways on in 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. He had already had one civil war with one of his sons, Absalom, and now as he's on his deathbed, Adonijah tries to take the throne by force. And it says in 1 Kings 1, verses 4 and 5, it says, verses 5 and 6, it says, "Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. His father had never at any time displeased him by asking, Why have you done thus and so? His dad never crossed him. David never said, What were you thinking? How many times as parents have you said that? What were you thinking? But this is a difficult tension that we live in. This idea of picking our battles. What are the things when we need to step up and say something? What are the things that we don't? And I'm not here to tell you all the answers because I don't have all the answers. I'm figuring this stuff out on the fly. I'm all ears, though. If you've got something for me, I'm glad to take that advice. But Scripture does talk about some bad moms. And by the way, it's kind of funny, it's funny the way we treat Mother's Day and Father's Day. All the time on Mother's Day, we get up here and say, aren't mothers so great? Aren't we so thankful for mothers? You guys are awesome. Keep up the good work. And then on Father's Day, we get up here. Now, you dads need to shape up. We need to get it together. That's the problem with the church is you dads. Okay? Now, don't worry. Next week, we're going to talk about the flip side of Ephesians chapter 5, and we're going to talk about wives and mothers. So hold on for that one. We're going to be fair with this. Now, the scripture does talk about some moms who make some bad decisions. But in these two instances, and in other places in scripture, it seems like when the kids don't turn out all right, that the blame falls squarely on the father's shoulders. Getting back to what it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. It all comes down and comes back to us. And so the question is, are we equipping our children with helpful tools in their spiritual walk with God? Or are we saddling them with harmful habits? Are we modeling the fruit of the Spirit to them? Or are we ourselves barren and unfruitful in the Lord? What are we forming in them? Will they look back on their childhood and be thankful for the foundation that was laid? Or will there be things ingrained in them from an early age that they will struggle for the rest of their lives to overcome? You know, there's a reason God requires those who would shepherd His church to be men who have shepherded well their own families. These passages we just looked at with Eli and David and their children. You know, Titus chapter 1, specifically verse 11 there in that passage, has very strong language to talk about the role of elders in dealing with false teachers whose mouths must be stopped. What makes us think that we would have the courage to stand up in a situation like that with a false teacher if we never had the backbone to say to our own teenagers, hey, look, I think you're going down a bad road here. There's a reason this is all tied together. So, young fathers, especially young fathers, we have to be preparing now for the day when we will answer the call to be deacons or elders. We're not just going to wake up one morning when we're in our 60s and decide, I think I'm ready to be an elder now. You know, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen without preparation and getting us ready for that point. Just like we're not going to wake up one day and say, okay, I'm ready to retire now, without making all the preparations for that day. And to be honest, I think a lot of us are putting a lot more forethought into retirement than we are to our spiritual service. I would be remiss if I didn't say over the course of this to the teens, to the teenagers among us, any teenagers here? There we go. To the teens among us today, that yes, this is difficult. I'm sorry, I actually skipped over this, and now I've got to go back because I forgot where it was in my notes, and I skipped over and kept going. Okay, yeah, to the teens, yeah. Remember what it says in Proverbs 27:6. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. You know that's true if you've ever had spinach stuck in your teeth and the friend has told you about it. And if you didn't have a mask to cover it up, I guess if you got spinach stuck in your teeth this morning, no big deal. But you know that a friend who can tell you something like that is a blessing. And so I think a lot of times parents are hesitant to address things because they're afraid, well, my kids are going to end up hating me. You know, if I call them out on this, and then that's going to make everything about our relationship strained, and then what? So, especially teenagers, it's kind of like if you're paying money to take an ACT prep course. You know, if you're not the actual, you're just taking a practice test in an ACT prep course. You want that teacher to tell you when you got things wrong, right? You want that teacher to correct you so that when the real test comes, you'll do better. If all through the prep course, if the teacher never corrected you, never told you anything you got wrong, then when you got to the real test, you'd be in trouble. Your parents are preparing you for a test much more important than the ACT. Real life can be a real test. And And so don't fight back. When they're trying to help you with these things, don't fight back. Don't get defensive. Listen. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, and even more so with parents. This could be a valuable thing. And so as we close quickly, I want to mention one thing. In the third page of the bulletin, we're going to start a parenting book club. This is the book we're going to start with. It's called Parenting Beyond Your Capacity. This is, of course, designed for the benefit of younger parents, but we need those who have been through these battles before and emerged on the other side. While we're still in the trenches, we need your wisdom to help us through this. So if that's something you'd be interested in participating in, just talk to me. We've got kind of a schedule, and we can talk more about that. I'm not planning to order books. I'm going to leave this up to everybody. I've done that before. I've gone out and ordered a bunch of books, and then they didn't get read. So I'll let you order the books yourself to make sure that those who want to participate are serious about participating. So we're going to be starting that in July. And then I'd like to close by reading a little more of that context in Matthew chapter 16 that I referenced just in passing earlier. Matthew 16, I'd like to read verses 24 through 26. It says, "Then Jesus told his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his own soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?'" COVID-19 has changed our lives. It has changed the way we think about things. Let's let this be a good change. Let's focus on the things that are important. Let's focus on spending time together as a family. Because we know you could raise the class president, prom king or queen, gets a full ride to college, graduates and gets a great paying job, buys a huge house, coaches Little League, retires early, travels the world, and dies and ends up in torment. You could do all those things right from a worldly perspective and still be a failure as a parent. Let's remember these things and let's focus on the important things. Not just the outward worldly things. Let's focus on the deeper spiritual things. And let's remember the value of our souls and the value that Jesus places on our souls. He loves us so much. He loves us so much he was willing to come down to this earth and to die on the cross for us. And the power of God raised him from the dead to show us that death is not the end. That we can have hope of resurrection too. That if we will be buried in that watery grave of baptism to be raised to walk in newness of life, we can experience this new life. And we can know the joy. Oh, the joy that comes from walking with God. So if there's anyone this morning, if this is something that you want to study more about, if this is something you want to talk about, if we need to pray together, if you're ready to be baptized, we'll gladly break the 6 foot, I said this a while back, we'll gladly break the 6 foot rule to baptize somebody this morning. If there's anything that we can do, you can come as we stand and sing.